The weight of the silver tray pressed against my forearm like a familiar ghost, the kind of presence I'd learned to carry without thinking after 3 years at Rossonero. My feet knew every uneven tile in this dining room, every spot where the marble transitioned from cream to charcoal, every table where wealthy men conducted business they pretended wasn't the kind that left bodies in the Chicago River. I moved through the Friday evening crowd with practiced invisibility, refilling water glasses and delivering bread baskets, while my mind tracked patterns the way Grandma Helena had taught me to read her old Portuguese prayer books, with attention to what wasn't said, to the spaces between words. Nina, table 14 needs their wine. Manuel, the floor manager, hissed as he passed, his cologne fighting a losing battle against the kitchen's garlic and rosemary. His stress meant someone important sat in that corner booth, the one with velvet curtains that could close for privacy. I nodded without breaking stride, already balancing a Barolo that cost more than my monthly rent on a cork-padded tray. The dining room hummed with the particular energy of people who measured their worth in influence rather than dollars, though they had plenty of those too. My uniform, black dress, white apron, sensible shoes that murdered my arches, made me part of the furniture, which was exactly how I survived in places like this, where being noticed by the wrong person could mean disappearing into the kind of trouble that grandmother's prayers couldn't fix. Table 14's curtain was partially drawn when I approached, enough to see the solitary figure inside. Dark suit, no tie, expensive watch catching the amber light from the table's candle. He sat with his back to the corner, a position I recognized from watching too many men who needed to see threats coming. "Your Barolo, sir," I said quietly, setting the glass down with hands that had learned not to tremble no matter what I saw or heard in this restaurant. He looked up, and something in those slate-gray eyes made my breath catch. Not fear, exactly, but recognition of a predator who knew he was prey tonight. I'd seen that look before, in the stray cats behind our building who'd learned the hard way that Chicago's alleys belonged to something bigger and meaner. "Thank you." His voice carried the weight of silk over steel, the kind of control that came from years of being obeyed without question. I should have left then, returned to my section, forgotten his face the way I forgot most of them. But my eyes had already catalogued what shouldn't have been there. 10 men scattered across the dining room, positioned like chess pieces around a king they intended to capture. 3 at the bar, nursing drinks they barely touched. 2 at table 7, pretending to enjoy their osso buco, while their gazes kept drifting toward the corner booth. 4 more near the entrance, blocking the obvious exit. And 1, the leader I suspected from the way the others kept glancing his direction, at table 9, directly in my section. The leader caught my eye and smiled, the kind of expression that made my skin crawl beneath my uniform. He raised his empty wine glass in a gesture that was somehow both casual and commanding. My feet carried me toward him, while my mind raced through possibilities. Whatever was about to happen, it would be loud and messy, and the kind of thing that got innocent waitresses hurt when they stood too close to powerful men's vendettas. "Another bottle," the leader said when I reached him, his Portuguese accent thick enough to place him somewhere south of Lisbon. "The Brunello, I think. We're celebrating tonight." I nodded, keeping my expression blank while my peripheral vision tracked the other 9 men. They were tightening the circle, imperceptibly to anyone not trained to notice predators stalking prey. Grandma Helena had raised me on stories about reading people, about survival in places where being poor and female meant learning to disappear when danger wore expensive suits. "Watch their hands, Mina Menina," she'd say, while teaching me to sort her medications, her arthritis-twisted fingers patient even when I fumbled. Hands tell the truth when mouths lie. These men's hands were too still, too ready, waiting for a signal. I returned to the service station, my pulse steady despite the adrenaline beginning to thread through my veins. The Brunello sat on the top shelf, requiring a ladder I'd climbed 1,000 times. But tonight, as I reached for it, my brain made calculations that had nothing to do with wine service, the distance from table 9 to the corner booth, the placement of the other men, the fact that Rossonero's kitchen had a back exit that led to an alley most patrons didn't know about, the way the man in the corner booth held himself like someone who'd survived ambushes before, but maybe not 10 against 1 odds in a crowded restaurant. My hands closed around the Brunello bottle. Then, with movements I'd practiced in nightmares about losing this job, losing the income that paid for Grandma Helena's medications and kept us in our modest apartment in Little Italy. I deliberately fumbled. The bottle slipped from my grip, tumbling through the air in slow motion, while my other hand swept the full tray of water glasses I'd prepared for table 6. The crash was spectacular. Glass shattering against marble, wine exploding across the leader's white shirt and expensive suit, water cascading over 3 nearby tables in a tsunami of chaos that made every head in the restaurant turn toward the commotion. Meu Deus, I gasped, my Portuguese accent thickening with manufactured horror. I'm so sorry. So terribly sorry. I dropped to my knees immediately, gathering shards with bare hands that I made sure to cut just enough to draw blood. Nothing said genuine accident, like a clumsy waitress injuring herself. The leader stood abruptly, wine dripping from his clothes, his fury evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. But it was the corner booth that mattered. In the chaos of staff rushing over with towels, of Manuel's horrified apologies to the wine-soaked patron, of other diners twisting in their seats to see the disaster, the man in the corner booth moved. He moved like smoke, like shadow, like someone who'd learned to disappear when attention focused elsewhere. By the time I risked a glance toward his table through the forest of legs and rushing servers, the velvet curtain hung empty, and the back hallway, the one that led to the kitchen and that alley exit, showed a door swinging gently closed. Nina. Manuel grabbed my elbow, hauling me upright. What were you thinking? That's a $300 bottle. I'm sorry, I stammered, letting tears blur my vision while my mind tracked the 9 remaining men. They'd realized too late what happened. Their target vanished in the confusion I'd created. The leader wiped wine from his face with murderous intent in his eyes, but whether for me or his escaped prey, I couldn't tell. Get to the kitchen, Manuel hissed. We'll discuss your employment after service. Go, now. I fled, blood from my cut palm dripping onto the pristine tile, leaving the dining room in the kind of uproar that would take 20 minutes to settle. 20 minutes for a man to disappear into Chicago's night, to reach wherever men like him went, when ambushes failed. The kitchen was its usual controlled chaos, line cooks shouting orders while steam rose from boiling pots, and the scent of searing meat filled the air. I headed straight for the first aid kit, wrapping gauze around my hand with shaking fingers that weren't entirely from shock. Rough night? Beatrice, another server, paused beside me with a tray of dirty dishes. Her kind face creased with concern. Dropped a bottle on table 9, I said, voice hollow. Manuel's probably going to fire me. You've worked here 3 years without incident. She squeezed my shoulder. He'll dock your pay and move on. We all have bad nights. If only she knew this wasn't a bad night. It was the kind of calculated risk that could get me killed if the wrong people realized the clumsy waitress had just ruined a carefully planned hit. I finished bandaging my hand and returned to the chaos of the dining room, where Manuel directed cleanup with the precision of a general managing battlefield logistics. The wine-soaked leader and his companions had vanished, leaving behind a hefty cash payment that more than covered their bill in the broken bottle. A tip, essentially, for a meal interrupted by an incompetent server. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of shame-faced apologies and whispered gossip among the staff about poor Nina, who'd finally cracked under the pressure. I played my part perfectly, accepting Manuel's lecture about focus and professionalism, with downcast eyes and mumbled promises to do better. By the time I hung up my apron at midnight, exhaustion sat heavy in my bones. The cut on my palm throbbed in time with my heartbeat, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed and pretend tonight had been nothing more than the kind of accident that happened to every server eventually. The December air bit through my thin coat as I exited through the staff entrance, my breath forming clouds in the amber glow of streetlights. The alley behind Rossonero smelled of garbage and the grease from kitchen vents, familiar and somehow comforting after the artificial elegance of the dining room. That was quite a performance. The voice came from shadows near the dumpster, smooth and controlled and belonging to the man from the corner booth. He stepped into the light, still wearing that expensive suit, though he'd added a long black coat that made him look like something from an old movie about Chicago's bloodier past. My heart kicked against my ribs, but I kept my face neutral, channeling every lesson Grandma Helena had taught about not showing fear to predators. I don't know what you mean. I dropped a bottle. It happens. at precisely the right moment to create maximum confusion. He moved closer, and I fought the urge to step back, covering my exit while drawing every eye away from the back hallway. Either you're the luckiest klutz in Chicago, or you saw exactly what was about to happen and chose to interfere. I should go. I tried to move past him, but he shifted, not blocking my path exactly, but making it clear the conversation wasn't over. They would have killed me, he said quietly. Not there, not in front of witnesses, but they'd have forced me outside, to a car, to somewhere their guns wouldn't matter to anyone who might hear. You saved my life tonight, Nina Carmo. The fact that he knew my full name sent ice through my veins. I dropped a bottle, that's all. Your hand is bleeding through the bandage. He nodded toward my palm, where red was indeed seeping through white gauze. You cut yourself deliberately, didn't you? To sell the accident, to make it look authentic rather than sabotage. You're mistaken. But my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. I'm Dominic Santos. He said it like I should know the name, and maybe I did. Whispers in the restaurant's shadows about the Santos family, about power that ran deeper than City Hall, about loyalty enforced through methods no one discussed in polite company. And you just made yourself very interesting to people who don't forget interesting women. I have to get home. This time I did push past him, my shoulder brushing his arm as I headed for the mouth of the alley. My grandmother will worry. Helena Carmo, age 78, lives with you in a second-floor apartment on Taylor Street. His words stopped me cold. She has rheumatoid arthritis, takes 6 different medications, sees Dr. Almeida twice a month at the community clinic. I turned slowly, fear finally breaking through my careful control. Stay away from her. Stay away from both of us. I'm not threatening you, Nina. Something almost like regret crossed his features. I'm telling you that I know who you are. And more importantly, so do they. The men you humiliated tonight. They'll figure out what you did eventually. They'll come looking for answers, maybe retribution. Then I'll deal with it. My voice hardened, channeling every ounce of strength that came from 3 years of slinging drinks for men who thought waitresses were furniture. I've survived worse than angry rich men before, not these rich men. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a business card, simple black with silver lettering that caught the streetlight. When they come, and they will come, call me. I protect what's mine, and as of tonight, you're under my protection, whether you want it or not. I didn't take the card. I'm not yours. I'm not anyone's. No, he agreed, pressing the card into my uninjured hand with surprising gentleness. You're your own, which is exactly why you interest me. Most people in this city belong to someone, through debt, or fear, or greed. But you risked your job, your safety, your grandmother's peace, for a stranger who couldn't offer you anything in return. That kind of courage is rare, Nina, and in my world, rare things become targets. He stepped back, melting toward a black car I hadn't noticed parked at the alley's end. Before he climbed inside, he looked back one more time. They'll come for you within 48 hours, he said. When they do, use that number. I don't forget debts, and I don't abandon people who saved my life. Then he was gone, the car pulling away into Chicago's midnight streets, leaving me alone with a business card burning against my palm, and the terrible certainty that my carefully invisible life had just shattered like a $300 bottle of wine. I walked home through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign, every shadow potentially hiding men with Portuguese accents and scores to settle. The card stayed clutched in my fist, a lifeline I wasn't sure I wanted or could afford to need. Grandma Helena's apartment light glowed warm through our second-floor window when I turned onto Taylor Street. She'd be awake despite the late hour, rosary beads clicking through her twisted fingers, while she prayed for my safety, the way she'd prayed every night since my parents died, and left me in her care at 15. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavy with the weight of choices made and consequences coming. Tomorrow I'd return to Rossonero and pretend to be the clumsy waitress who'd cost them money and embarrassment. I'd avoid thinking about slate-gray eyes and voices like silk over steel. But tonight, as I unlocked our door and found Grandma Helena dozing in her chair, rosary still wrapped around her fingers, I allowed myself one moment of honest fear. Because Dominic Santos was right. They would come. And when they did, I'd have to decide whether survival meant staying invisible or stepping into the light with a man whose protection might cost more than any debt I was willing to pay. The business card went into my pocket, close enough to reach, far enough to pretend it didn't exist. For now, at least, I could pretend tonight had been nothing more than a broken bottle and bad luck. But deep down, in the part of me that had learned to read danger in the spaces between words, I knew better. The game had changed. And I'd be lying if I said some reckless part of me wasn't curious to see what came next. The Sunday lunch shift at Rossonero dragged like broken glass across skin. Every time the entrance door opened, my shoulders tensed, expecting Portuguese accents and questions I couldn't answer without admitting what I'd done. But 48 hours after the bottle incident, only regular patrons filled the dining room, lawyers celebrating case victories, families marking christenings and confirmations, the usual parade of people for whom a $200 meal meant celebration rather than catastrophe. Manuel had docked 2 weeks' pay for the broken Brunello and assigned me to the worst section, near the kitchen doors where the heat was suffocating and tips ran lean. Punishment delivered with the kind of cold efficiency that made it clear I was one mistake away from unemployment. "Table 3 needs more bread," Beatrice whispered as she passed, balancing a tray of dirty plates. Her eyes held sympathy I didn't deserve, considering she had no idea my clumsiness had been calculated sabotage rather than genuine accident. I grabbed a basket of rosemary focaccia and headed toward table 3, my body moving through familiar choreography, while my mind replayed Friday night on an endless loop. The way Dominic Santos had materialized in that alley, knowing my name, my grandmother's address, the precise details of our struggling life. The business card that still lived in my coat pocket, checked compulsively every time I reached for my keys or phone. "When they come," he'd said. Not if, when. The lunch shift ended at 4, and I collected my meager tips with gratitude that felt hollow. $73 for 6 hours of work, barely enough to cover this week's groceries and a fraction of what Grandma Helena's medications cost monthly. The community clinic charged on a sliding scale, but sliding only went so far when arthritis required drugs that pharmaceutical companies priced like liquid gold. I changed out of my uniform in the cramped staff bathroom, pulling on jeans and a sweater that had seen better years, better lives. The mirror reflected exhaustion I couldn't quite hide. Dark circles under brown eyes, hair pulled back in a practical bun that revealed too much of a face I preferred to keep forgettable. The business card emerged from my coat pocket as I checked for my phone. Simple black cardstock, raised silver lettering that spelled out a number and nothing else. No name, no company, just 10 digits that represented either salvation or damnation, depending on which version of Dominic Santos existed beneath that silk over steel voice. "Nina?" Manuel's voice made me jump, the card slipping back into my pocket with practiced speed. "A moment before you leave?" My heart hammered against my ribs as I followed him to the small office behind the wine storage, a windowless room that smelled of cork and old ledgers. He closed the door with ominous finality, then turned to face me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I received a call yesterday," he said slowly, "from a man asking about you. Your schedule, how long you'd worked here, whether you were reliable." Ice flooded my veins. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I told him employee information was confidential and hung up." Manuel's eyes searched my face. "But this morning, 3 men came during prep. They sat at the bar, ordered expensive whiskey, and watched the staff. One of them asked Carlos which server had broken the bottle Friday night, whether it was unusual behavior for you." The ice turned to lead, settling heavy in my stomach. "What did Carlos say?" "That you'd worked here 3 years without incident. That you're the best server we have for reading difficult customers and avoiding problems." Manuel leaned against his desk. "Nina, I don't know what happened Friday night beyond a broken bottle, but those men weren't asking idle questions. If you're in some kind of trouble—" "I'm not," I lied, the words automatic even though we both knew they were hollow. I dropped a bottle. That's all. They left a message." He pulled a folded napkin from his pocket, the Rossonero logo embossed in gold across cream linen. "Asked me to give this to you." My hands trembled as I took the napkin, unfolding it to reveal a single sentence written in precise block letters. We need to talk about Friday. Cafe Carlotta, Tuesday 3 p.m. No signature, no threat. But the subtext screamed loud enough to make my ears ring. Refuse this invitation and see what happens to clumsy waitresses who interfere in business that doesn't concern them. Thank you for telling me, I managed, refolding the napkin with fingers that barely cooperated. I'll handle it. Nina. Manuel's voice stopped me at the door. Whatever this is, be careful. Men who drink 50-year-old Macallan at 2 p.m. aren't the kind who accept no gracefully. I nodded and escaped before he could offer more warnings I didn't need, before the fear crawling up my throat could manifest as the kind of panic that made smart women do stupid things. The walk home took 20 minutes through streets I'd navigated since childhood. Past shops where owners knew Grandma Helena by name. Past St. Anthony's where Father Costa still gave her communion despite arthritic hands that could barely hold the wafer. This was my neighborhood, my territory. The small corner of Chicago where being invisible meant being safe. Except I wasn't invisible anymore. I'd chosen to be seen, to act, to save a stranger's life, and now the price for that visibility was coming due. Grandma Helena sat at our kitchen table when I entered, her twisted hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. She looked up with eyes that still sparkled despite 78 years of life that had taken everything but never broken her. Minha menina, she said softly, switching to the Portuguese we used when English felt insufficient for what needed saying. You have the look of someone carrying stones too heavy for one person. I sank into the chair across from her, the napkin burning against my palm. Just tired, Vovo. Long shift. Mentirosa. Liar. But she said it with love, reaching across to pat my hand with fingers that could barely uncurl. Your mother had the same expression when she tried to hide trouble from me. The eyes give you away. Too watchful, like a rabbit who knows the fox is hunting. It's nothing I can't handle. Another lie, but what else could I say? That I'd deliberately sabotaged a hit on a Mafia boss? That men were asking questions about me at work? That I carried the phone number of someone whose protection would bind me to a world where Grandma Helena's prayers wouldn't be enough to keep me safe? She studied me for a long moment, then sighed. When your grandfather died and left me with nothing but debt and a baby to raise, I learned something important. Sometimes the stones we carry aren't meant to be carried alone. Sometimes asking for help is the only way to survive. And sometimes asking for help means owing debts we can never repay, I countered gently. Then we pray the person we owe is worth the debt. She squeezed my hand with what little strength remained in hers. But we don't pretend the stones aren't there. Pretending only makes them heavier. I helped her to bed after dinner, her body light as paper in my arms, her breathing labored from lungs that struggled more each winter. The medications that kept her alive cost $200 monthly, even with the clinic's assistance, and my Rosso Nero salary barely covered rent and utilities on top of that. No savings, no emergency fund, no buffer between us and the kind of poverty that killed people slowly, through untreated illnesses and impossible choices. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of the bedroom we shared, listening to Grandma Helena's wheezing breaths and trying to calculate impossible mathematics. The napkin sat on my nightstand, its message clear. Tuesday at 3. Tomorrow. Dominic Santos's card lived in my coat pocket, 10 digits away from a protection I wasn't sure I wanted. But wanting and needing were different animals, and as dawnlight crept through our thin curtains, I acknowledged the truth I'd been avoiding since Friday night. I needed help, the kind of help that came with silk over steel voices, and the power to make problems disappear, even if that same power could make me disappear just as easily. Monday passed in agonizing slowness. I called in sick to Rosso Nero, claiming a stomach bug that Manuel accepted with the weariness of a man who'd seen too many servers crack under pressure. Beatrice texted asking if I needed anything, her kindness a reminder that normal people existed beyond the nightmare I'd stumbled into. I spent the day researching Dominic Santos on library computers, using public Wi-Fi that couldn't be traced back to our apartment. The results were both illuminating and terrifying. Santos family, Chicago's North Side, connections dating back to Prohibition. Legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction, import-export, that barely concealed the machinery underneath. No criminal record, no arrests, nothing that would stand up in court. But the absence of evidence was its own testimony to power wielded carefully, violence applied precisely, Problems solved before they became police matters. One article from 5 years ago, buried in the Tribune's archives. 3 men found dead in a warehouse. Execution style. No witnesses. No suspects. The victims had been known associates of a rival family who'd tried to move into Santos territory. The case remained unsolved, filed away with hundreds of other Chicago murders that no one would ever answer for. I closed the browser and walked home through November cold that bit through my inadequate coat, past storefronts decorated for Christmas that felt obscenely cheerful, given the decision weighing on my shoulders. Tomorrow at 3, I could meet the men who'd wanted to kill Dominic Santos. I could explain that breaking the bottle had been genuine accident, apologize for ruining their evening, hope they believed the frightened waitress act. Or I could make a different choice. Tuesday morning, I woke before dawn and watched Chicago wake up outside our window. Streetlights clicking off, buses groaning to life, the city's heartbeat resuming its familiar rhythm. Grandma Helena slept fitfully beside me, her breathing rough enough to make me check twice that she was still alive. At 2:30, I pulled on my best attempt at professional clothing. Black slacks without holes, a gray sweater that hadn't faded too badly, boots I'd waterproofed with drugstore spray. I told Grandma Helena I had an appointment at the clinic, another lie to add to the growing collection. "Be careful, Mina Menina," she called as I left. And I wondered if she somehow knew that careful had stopped being an option the moment I dropped that bottle. The address on Dominic Santos's card led to a building in River North, all glass and steel and the kind of understated luxury that screamed money without needing to shout. The lobby featured marble floors and abstract art that probably cost more than our apartment building, and a security desk manned by someone whose suit couldn't quite hide the bodyguard underneath. "Nina Carmo," I said to the guard, my voice steadier than my hands. "I'm expected." He made a call, spoke quietly, then nodded toward the elevator. "15th floor. Mr. Santos is waiting." The elevator ride took forever, and no time at all, my reflection in the polished doors showing a woman trying very hard to look brave. The 15th floor opened onto a reception area that could have belonged to any legitimate business. Sleek furniture, soft lighting. A receptionist who smiled with professional warmth and gestured toward a frosted glass door. "Go right in, Ms. Carmo." Dominic Santos stood behind a massive desk that overlooked the Chicago skyline. The city spread beneath him like a kingdom he'd claimed through means both legal and otherwise. He'd traded Friday's suit for casual elegance. Black sweater, no tie, expensive watch catching afternoon light that poured through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Nina." He gestured to a leather chair positioned across from his desk. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't come for you," I said, remaining standing. "I came because I'm supposed to be at Café Carlotta in 20 minutes. Meeting men who want to discuss Friday night. And I'm trying to decide if I should go alone, or if I need the kind of help that comes with prices I'm not sure I can afford." Something flickered in those slate gray eyes, respect, maybe, or appreciation for directness. "Sit, please, and I'll explain exactly what kind of help I'm offering and what it costs." I sat, because my legs were shaking, and because 3 years of serving wealthy men had taught me when resistance was futile. Dominic moved around the desk to lean against it, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "The men who wanted me dead Friday night work for Joaquim Silva," he began. "He controls the South Side drug trade and has been trying to expand north for 2 years. I'm what stands between him and that expansion. So killing you would eliminate the obstacle," I said flatly. "Precisely. Except you eliminated his opportunity instead." Dominic's mouth curved in something not quite a smile. "Which makes you both a hero and a liability. Silva needs to know if you acted deliberately or accidentally, if you're my associate or just a clumsy waitress, if you're someone he needs to handle before you become a larger problem. And if I go to that cafe and convince him it was an accident, he'll either believe you and leave you alone, or he'll decide you're lying and make an example of you." Dominic's voice was matter-of-fact, delivering horror with the same tone others used to discuss weather. "The kind of example that ends with your grandmother finding your body, assuming Silva's people are merciful enough to return it." The image made bile rise in my throat. "So, my choices are work for you or die. Your choices are accept my protection, or face Silva alone. What that protection looks like is negotiable. I studied him, this man whose life I'd saved without understanding the full implications. What do you want from me? The same thing you did Friday night, to see patterns others miss, to be present in spaces where I can't be, to use your invisibility as a weapon. He paused. You're a waitress, Nina. You move through rooms full of powerful people who never truly see you. You hear conversations they think are private because they forget furniture has ears. That skill, that particular kind of observation, is worth far more than you realize. You want me to spy for you. I want you to survive. And in exchange for that survival, yes, I want access to your skills. He pulled a phone from his pocket, expensive and unfamiliar. This is encrypted. When I need eyes somewhere I can't go, you'll receive a message with location and target. You observe, report, continue with your normal life. In return, you and Helena are under Santos' protection. Silva won't touch you. No one will touch you. And when you decide I'm no longer useful, the question emerged harder than I'd intended. Then we part ways. His expression was unreadable. I don't keep people who want to leave, Nina. But I also don't forget loyalty. Work with me. Prove yourself valuable, and I'll ensure you're taken care of long after our arrangement ends. I looked at the phone in his outstretched hand, thinking about Grandma Helena's labored breathing, about Cafe Carlotta and men who made examples of waitresses who interfered with business, about choices that weren't really choices at all. And if I say no, then I'll wish you luck at 3 o'clock and hope Silva's people are kinder than I think they'll be. No threat in his voice, just acknowledgement of reality. But you didn't come here to say no, Nina. You came here because you already know which choice keeps you and your grandmother alive. He was right, and I hated him for it. Hated that he'd read me so easily, that my desperation was apparently visible despite 3 years of practice at hiding it. But hating him didn't change the math. I took the phone. Good. Satisfaction colored his tone as he straightened. Now let me drive you to Cafe Carlotta and show Joaquim Silva exactly whose side you're on. The black Mercedes smelled of leather and the kind of cologne that came in bottles shaped like art. Dominic drove with the casual confidence of someone who'd never worried about traffic tickets or consequences, his hands steady on the wheel, while Chicago slid past tinted windows that turned the world into something distant and unreal. You don't have to go in, he said, as we approached Little Italy, the neighborhood where I'd grown up, and where Cafe Carlotta had served espresso and pastel de nata to Portuguese immigrants for 3 generations. I can handle Silva myself. If I don't show, he'll think I'm hiding. I kept my voice level despite the terror coiling in my stomach. Which means I am guilty. Which means he'll keep looking for ways to prove it. Better to face him now with you beside me than spend the rest of my life waiting for him to corner me alone. Dominic glanced at me, something like approval in those slate-gray eyes. You understand the game better than most people who've spent years in this world. My grandmother taught me that predators respect prey that stands its ground. I stared at the cafe approaching on the right, its cheerful yellow awning a lie against the November gray. Even if standing ground is just another kind of calculated surrender. He parked across the street, engine idling while he studied the cafe through windows that revealed a half-full dining room. The 3 men at the corner table, Silva in the middle, his lieutenants flanking. They'll have more people outside, watching approaches. Standard protocol for a meet that might go badly. How badly? My hands clenched in my lap, fingernails digging crescents into palms. Depends on how convincing you are. He killed the engine and turned to face me fully. Tell me about Friday night, why you did it. The truth this time, not the accident story. The question caught me off guard. Does it matter? It matters if I'm going to trust you with information that could destroy everything I've built. His voice was soft, but unyielding. So tell me, Nina Carmo, why did a waitress risk her job and safety for a stranger? I looked away from his intensity, focusing on the cafe where men waited to decide my fate. My father died when I was 10. Heart attack at his construction job, no insurance, left my mother and me with nothing. She worked 3 jobs trying to keep us afloat, and it killed her 5 years later. Exhaustion, stress, a body pushed past what it could survive. The words emerged dull. Reciting history I usually kept locked behind walls built from necessity. Grandma Helena took me in, but she was already sick, already struggling. I've been invisible my whole life, Nina. The poor kid, the scholarship student, the waitress serving people who don't see me as human. And I watched you Friday night, saw those men positioning themselves, recognized what was about to happen, because I've learned to read violence the way rich people read stock portfolios. And you chose to act. Dominic finished quietly. I chose to do what no one did for my parents. To interfere, to change the outcome, to make one person's death not inevitable. I finally met his gaze. Even if that person is someone whose hands probably aren't any cleaner than Silva's. Even if saving you meant stepping into a world where invisibility won't protect me anymore. Silence filled the car, heavy with things neither of us wanted to name. Finally, Dominic reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather wallet, extracting a photograph so worn the edges had softened to velvet. My mother, he said, handing it to me. Teresa Santos. She died when I was 12. Cancer that could have been treated if we'd caught it earlier, if we'd had insurance, if my father's work had been legal enough to qualify for benefits. The photograph showed a woman with kind eyes and dark hair, holding a young boy who would grow into the man beside me. She looked happy in a way that photographs couldn't fake, her smile reaching places deeper than expression. My father built this empire so I'd never be that helpless again, Dominic continued, voice rough with memory. So money wouldn't decide who lived and died in our family, but empires require maintenance, protection, sometimes violence against people who threaten what we've built. I'm not proud of everything I've done, Nina, but I'm not ashamed of surviving either. He took the photograph back, returning it to his wallet with the care of someone handling something sacred. You saved my life because you understood what it meant to lose someone to circumstances beyond control. I respect that more than you know. And I promise you this. Work with me. And you'll never watch your grandmother die because money decided she wasn't worth saving. The promise hit harder than any threat could have. I nodded once, throat too tight for words, and reached for the door handle. Café Carlotta's bell chimed as we entered, drawing every eye to the unlikely pair we made. The waitress in her thrift store best, and the man whose presence commanded attention, like gravity, commanded falling objects. The rich scent of espresso and fresh pastry wrapped around us, familiar and incongruous with the tension crackling through the room. Joaquim Silva rose as we approached, his lean face set in an expression that could have been greeting or warning. Up close, I recognized him from Friday night. The leader whose expensive suit I'd drenched in Brunello, whose carefully planned ambush I'd destroyed with broken glass and manufactured chaos. Ms. Carmo. His Portuguese accent was thicker than mine, roots planted firmly in Lisbon's working-class neighborhoods. Thank you for coming. And Mr. Santos. An unexpected pleasure. Nina is under my protection now, Dominic said, his hand settling at the small of my back, in a gesture that looked casual but telegraphed ownership. Any conversation with her includes me. Silva's smile was thin as wire. Of course. Please sit. I've ordered bica and pastéis. No sense having uncomfortable conversations on empty stomachs. We sat, me beside Dominic, Silva's lieutenant studying us with the flat eyes of men who'd killed before, and would again without losing sleep. A server I recognized from neighborhood festivals, Carlos's cousin I thought, brought tiny cups of espresso and the custard tarts that tasted like childhood and simpler times. I'll be direct, Silva began, stirring sugar into his bica with precise movements. Friday night at Rosso Nero, you destroyed a bottle of expensive wine during what I'd intended to be a private business dinner. Unfortunate timing, Ms. Carmo. Almost suspiciously unfortunate. It was an accident. I wrapped my hands around the espresso cup, grateful for something to anchor myself. I misjudged the weight of the tray, lost my grip. Bad luck, nothing more. Bad luck that allowed Mr. Santos to slip away during the confusion. Silva's gaze moved between us. Bad luck that cost me a significant opportunity. You understand my skepticism. I understand that sometimes accidents are just accidents. My voice was steady despite the fear coating my tongue. I'm a waitress who dropped a bottle. That's all I am, Senor Silva. Are you? He leaned forward slightly, Because waitresses don't typically leave restaurants accompanied by the men whose lives they coincidentally saved. Waitresses don't walk into cafes beside men like Santos, unless they're more than random employees who fumbled glassware. Dominic's hand found mine under the table, his grip firm and grounding. Nina is under my protection because I choose to extend it. Her reasons are her own, and not subject to your interrogation. Everything in this city is subject to my interrogation when it affects my business. Silva's voice hardened. You've blocked my northern expansion for 2 years, Santos. I'm tired of playing by rules you established when my people control 3 times the territory yours do. Friday night was supposed to end that stalemate. Instead, your pet waitress interfered. I'm not his pet, I said before I could stop myself, and I didn't interfere with anything except gravity and my own clumsiness. Something flashed in Silva's eyes. Reassessment, maybe. Or grudging respect for stupidity, masquerading as courage. Your grandmother, she still lives on Taylor Street? 2nd floor, above the pharmacy? The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Ice flooded my veins, but Dominic's hand tightened on mine, steadying and warning simultaneously. If you're suggesting, Dominic said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and quiet, that an old woman might suffer consequences for her granddaughter's employment choices, I should remind you that such actions would constitute a declaration of war. And wars are expensive, Joachim. More expensive than most people can afford. I'm suggesting, Silva replied, that coincidences make me nervous, and nervous men make poor decisions. I'd hate for poor decisions to affect innocent people. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too warm, the cheerful yellow walls closing in like a trap I'd walked into willingly. But before I could respond, Dominic stood, pulling me with him. This conversation is over, he announced. Nina has told you the truth. An accident, nothing more. If you choose not to believe her, that's your prerogative. But understand that any action taken against her or her family will be considered an act of aggression against the Santos family. And I respond to aggression definitively. Silva remained seated, but his lieutenants shifted, hands moving toward jackets in the universal gesture of armed men preparing for violence. The cafe held its breath, other patrons suddenly fascinated by their coffee, unwilling to witness whatever came next. 1 month, Silva said finally. 1 month to prove she's truly just a clumsy waitress and not your newest operative. If she stays invisible, stays in her lane, we'll consider Friday an unfortunate accident. But if she appears anywhere near my operations, anywhere near my people, I'll interpret that as confirmation of my suspicions, and we'll revisit this conversation with different parameters. Agreed. Dominic's hand remained at my back, guiding me toward the exit. 1 month of normal life. Nina goes to work, takes care of her grandmother, causes no trouble, and you leave her alone. We made it to the door before Silva spoke again, his voice carrying across the hushed room. Ms. Carmo? The next time you drop something valuable, make sure it's truly an accident. Because second chances are rare in my line of work, and I don't offer thirds. The November air hit like salvation when we exited, cold and clean after the suffocating tension of Café Carlotta. Dominic guided me to the Mercedes without speaking, his silence heavy with things I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. We were 2 blocks away before he finally said, "You did well. Better than most people facing Silva for the first time." He threatened my grandmother. The words emerged flat, shock numbing the terror that should have accompanied them. He knows where we live, knows her schedule, knows everything about us. Of course he does. I told you. Silva doesn't make empty threats. Dominic navigated through late afternoon traffic with the same confidence he applied to everything else. But he also doesn't waste resources on small targets. You bought yourself a month of safety. Use it wisely. Use it how? I turned to face him, anger finally breaking through the numbness. You said I'd be under your protection, that working for you meant Silva couldn't touch me. That lasted exactly 20 minutes before he was threatening violence against a 78-year-old woman with arthritis. He threatened because he needed to establish parameters. Dominic's voice remained calm, infuriatingly controlled. Now those parameters exist. 1 month of invisibility. After that, if you're still associated with me, Silva will have to accept that association or commit to war. And he's not ready for war, not yet. So I'm bait. A test to see if you'll actually protect someone. or if your promises are as empty as everyone else's. You're an investment. He pulled to a stop outside my apartment building, killing the engine before turning to face me fully. And I protect my investments, Nina. Always. I wanted to argue, to rage against the casual way he'd inserted me into his war with Silva, against the phone in my pocket that represented obligation and danger, and a future I'd never chosen. But exhaustion was winning over anger, and Grandma Helena would be worried by now. Her prayers probably wearing grooves and rosary beads older than I was. 1 month, I said, reaching for the door handle. Then what? Then we see if you're willing to be more than just a waitress who got unlucky. Dominic's expression was unreadable. And I find out if I was right to trust you with information that could destroy everything I've built. I climbed out of the Mercedes, the encrypted phone heavy in my coat pocket, Silva's threats echoing in my head alongside Dominic's promises. The game had rules now, parameters established over espresso and custard tarts, consequences outlined with the kind of clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. Grandma Helena met me at the door, her twisted hands reaching for mine, her eyes searching my face for evidence of the trouble she'd somehow sensed. Mina Menina, you were gone so long. I worried. I'm okay, Vovo. I helped her back to her chair, guilt churning in my stomach for lies I was already telling. Just a long appointment at the clinic. Everything's fine. She studied me with the wisdom of 7 decades navigating a world that tried to break people like us. You smell like expensive cologne and lies, Nina. Whatever you're involved in, whatever choices you're making, remember, some debts cost more than money to repay. I know. I kissed her forehead, breathing in the lavender soap she'd used my entire life. I'm being careful. I promise. But promises felt thin against the weight of what I'd agreed to, against the knowledge that careful had stopped being enough the moment I'd dropped that bottle. Dominic Santos had given me protection, purpose, a way forward that might actually keep Grandma Helena alive and healthy. The price was simply everything I'd ever been. Invisible, safe, separate from the violence that governed Chicago's shadows. As I helped her prepare dinner, chattering about invented clinic appointments and fictional conversations with nurses I'd never met, the encrypted phone buzzed once against my hip. The message was simple. Meet tomorrow, 9 a.m., address attached. Bring eyes, not questions. And just like that, my month of invisibility transformed into the first day of something else entirely. A life where I was finally seen, finally valuable, finally necessary to someone whose world operated by rules I'd only glimpsed from the outside. I typed back a single word, understood, and returned to stirring soup that suddenly tasted like ashes and choices I couldn't unmake. The address Dominic sent led to a warehouse district on the south edge of downtown, all crumbling brick and chain-link fences marking territory where legitimate business ended and Chicago's other economy began. I arrived at 8:45, 20 minutes early, because punctuality was the only control I had left, my breath forming clouds in December air that bit through my inadequate coat. A black SUV idled near the entrance, and Fernando Ferreira, one of Dominic's men I'd seen briefly at his office, emerged as I approached. He was built like a concrete wall with careful eyes that assessed me with professional efficiency before nodding toward the building. Mr. Santos is waiting inside. 3rd floor, west side. His voice carried the rough edges of someone who'd learned English late and violence early. You need anything, you call this number. He pressed a card into my palm. Day or night, understood? Understood. I pocketed the card alongside the encrypted phone and Dominic's original contact information, my life apparently now measured in emergency numbers and conditional protection. The warehouse interior smelled of dust and neglect, concrete floors marked with oil stains and the ghosts of whatever legitimate operations had once occupied this space. My footsteps echoed as I climbed metal stairs toward the 3rd floor, each step carrying me further from the invisible waitress I'd been, and closer to whatever Dominic Santos was transforming me into. He stood near tall windows overlooking the street, silhouetted against winter morning light that softened the hard edges of his profile. Today's uniform was tactical elegance, black jeans, sweater, boots that looked expensive and practical. Working clothes for someone whose work involved more than paperwork and conference calls. You're early, he observed without turning. Good. Punctuality is rare in this business. You said bring eyes, not questions. I crossed the empty space between us, my own boots loud against concrete. So I brought both, and I'm choosing when to use which. A smile flickered across his face. Fair enough. Let's start with what I need you to see. He gestured to a laptop positioned on a makeshift table, construction plywood balanced on sawhorses, surrounded by photographs and documents that looked like intelligence files. The screen showed surveillance footage of a restaurant I didn't recognize, upscale Italian by the decor, customers arriving in expensive cars while valets performed their choreographed dance. Giancarlo's, Dominic explained. Neutral territory, owned by the Bianchi family who've stayed out of the conflicts between Silva and me. 3 nights a week, it hosts meetings between various players in Chicago's underground economy. Drugs, gambling, prostitution, money laundering. If it's illegal and profitable, it gets discussed over their osso buco. I studied the footage, watching well-dressed men arrive and depart with the casual arrogance of people who believe themselves untouchable. And you want me to work there? I want you to observe there. He pulled up a photograph of a middle-aged man with silver hair and expensive taste in suits. This is Paolo Bianchi, the owner. He's looking for servers. Discreet people who understand that some conversations aren't meant to be remembered. I've arranged an interview for you this afternoon. And if I get the job? My stomach churned with anxiety that tasted like morning coffee and bad decisions. Then you work there legitimately, serve tables, make tips, be invisible the way you've always been. Dominic's voice was steady, laying out parameters like a general planning campaign's. Except you'll remember certain conversations. Note which players are meeting, what alliances are forming, where Silva's people are moving. Information I can't gather because my face is too recognizable, my presence too obvious. You want me to spy on everyone. The words emerged flat. I want you to survive while being useful. He turned to face me fully, those slate-gray eyes intense. Silva gave you 1 month to prove you're just a clumsy waitress. Working at Giancarlo's establishes exactly that story. You lost your job at Rossonero, needed work, took a position at another upscale restaurant. Completely normal, entirely believable. Except I'll be reporting everything I hear directly to you. Except you'll be protected while gathering information that keeps both of us alive. Dominic moved closer, and I caught his scent. Sandalwood and something darker, more complex. This is how intelligence works, Nina. Small observations building into large pictures. Patterns emerging from chaos. You're naturally talented at reading rooms, at being present without drawing attention. That skill is valuable. Use it correctly, and you'll never worry about Helena's medications again. Use it incorrectly, and Silva will know within days that you're working for me. The threat was implicit but clear. So no pressure. Pressure is what forges steel from iron. He handed me a folder thick with documents. Paolo Bianchi's application requirements, your fabricated work history, references I've arranged. Memorize it all before the interview. And Nina? He waited until I met his eyes. Once you accept this position, there's no pretending anymore. You'll be actively operating in my world, with all the dangers that entails. I took the folder, its weight somehow heavier than paper and ink should feel. The interview is at 3? 2:30. Address is inside. Dominic returned to studying the surveillance footage, dismissing me with the kind of casual authority that assumed obedience. Fernando will drive you and wait nearby. Any problems? Any sense that something's wrong? You walk away. We'll find another approach. And if there are no problems? I asked. If I get the job and start gathering your intelligence? Then we move to the next phase, teaching you how to observe without being obvious about it, how to remember conversations verbatim, how to identify which information matters and which is noise. He glanced back at me. You have natural talent, Nina. But talent requires training to become expertise. I left the warehouse with the folder clutched against my chest, Fernando's silent presence shadowing me back to his SUV. The drive to my apartment took 15 minutes through morning traffic, time I spent reviewing the fabricated history Dominic had constructed. Nina Carmo, 3 years at Rossonero, excellent service record, until an unfortunate incident with dropped glassware. References from 2 fictional previous employers, phone numbers that would route to people on Dominic's payroll trained to deliver convincing performances. A carefully constructed lie that would hold up to casual investigation, but fall apart under serious scrutiny. "You need anything before tonight, you call," Fernando said, as I exited the SUV outside my building. "Mr. Santos takes care of his people. Remember that." Grandma Helena was still sleeping when I entered, her breathing labored enough to make me check twice that she was alive. I laid the folder on our kitchen table and stared at the fabricated history that would either save us or destroy whatever remained of my honest life. The interview outfit came from the back of my closet, a black dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral, sensible heels that matched, minimal jewelry that looked professional without being presumptuous. I stood before the bathroom mirror and practiced the smile I'd perfected at Rossonero, the expression that said I was competent but forgettable, skilled but not threatening. "You look beautiful, Mina Menina," Grandma Helena said from her chair when I emerged, her twisted hands wrapped around afternoon tea. "New job interview?" "Yes." The lie came easier this time, smoothed by repetition. "A restaurant downtown. Better pay, closer to home. God provides when we trust him." She smiled with the faith of someone who'd survived worse than I could imagine. "Your mother would be proud of how you care for this old woman." Guilt twisted like broken glass in my chest. "Get some rest, Vovo. I'll be home for dinner." Fernando arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, his SUV somehow both conspicuous and invisible in our working-class neighborhood. The drive to Giancarlo's took 20 minutes through Chicago's heart. Past landmarks I'd known my entire life now filtered through the knowledge of how much corruption and violence they concealed. Giancarlo's occupied a corner building in the financial district. All old-world elegance and the kind of understated luxury that came from generations of family wealth. The interior gleamed with mahogany and brass, white tablecloths crisp as fresh snow, crystal catching light from chandeliers that had probably illuminated this space since the 20s. Paolo Bianchi met me in his office, a wood-paneled room that smelled of cigars and old money. He was exactly what the photograph suggested. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with eyes that had seen everything Chicago's underworld offered and chosen to profit from observation rather than participation. "Ms. Carmo." He gestured to a leather chair. "Thank you for coming. Your application was very thorough. Thank you for the opportunity, Senor Bianchi." I kept my Portuguese accent subtle, a reminder of shared cultural roots without being obvious about it. 3 years at Rossonero. He reviewed my fabricated history with the careful attention of someone who knew how to spot lies. "Excellent references, though I notice you left after an incident involving broken glassware." "An unfortunate accident." I met his gaze steadily. "I misjudged a tray's weight. It happens to even experienced servers occasionally." "Indeed." Something flickered in his eyes. Knowledge, maybe, of exactly what had happened that night, and who it had affected. "And now you're seeking employment at an establishment known for discretion and particular clientele." "I'm seeking employment that pays well and values professionalism," I countered carefully. "Your reputation for both is excellent." He studied me for a long moment, and I had the uncomfortable sense of being assessed by someone who understood Chicago's machinery far better than I did. Finally, he nodded. "I have high standards for my servers, Ms. Carmo. You will see and hear things that aren't your business. You will serve people whose conversations must remain private. Can you be invisible when necessary?" "I've been invisible my entire life, Senor Bianchi." The truth emerged before I could filter it. Being seen is the exception, not the rule. A smile crossed his face, genuine and slightly sad. "Then, perhaps you're exactly what Giancarlo's needs. When can you start?" "Whenever you need me." Hope and dread warred in my chest. "Tomorrow evening, 5 o'clock. Training shift with Beatriz. She's been with us 15 years and knows every protocol." He stood, extending his hand. "Welcome to Giancarlo's, Ms. Carmo. I trust you'll find the work rewarding in ways that extend beyond monetary compensation." The phrasing felt loaded with meaning I couldn't quite decipher. I shook his hand and left, Fernando's silent presence waiting in the SUV outside. "How'd it go?" he asked as I climbed in. "I start tomorrow." The reality settled over me like weight. Training at 5. He nodded and pulled into traffic, driving me not toward home, but toward the warehouse district where Dominic waited. The sun was setting by the time we arrived, winter darkness claiming Chicago earlier each day, shadows lengthening across concrete and chain link. Dominic stood in the same position as this morning, silhouetted against windows that now showed city lights beginning to sparkle like grounded stars. He turned as I entered, satisfaction evident in the slight curve of his mouth. "Bianchi hired you. Tomorrow at 5. I crossed to stand beside him, looking out at the city that suddenly felt both more familiar and more alien. He knows something happened at Rossonero. He knows I'm not just a random applicant looking for work. Of course he knows. Paolo Bianchi knows everything that happens in Chicago's underground." Dominic's voice was matter of fact. "But he also respects discretion and competence. You demonstrated both today. That's what matters. And when Silva finds out I'm working at Giancarlo's?" The question emerged quieter than I'd intended. "He'll see exactly what we want him to see. A waitress who lost her job and found new employment at a neutral establishment. Nothing threatening, nothing suspicious. Just survival." Dominic turned to face me. "You did well today, Nina. Better than I expected for someone so new to this world." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Every moment, every decision, every word feels like walking on ice that might crack. Fear keeps you sharp. It's when you stop being afraid that mistakes happen." He moved closer, and I caught the intensity in his eyes, something beyond professional assessment. "But you're not alone in this. I meant what I said about protection. You're mine now, Nina, and I take care of what's mine." The possessive phrasing should have bothered me. Instead, it felt like the first solid ground I'd stood on since Friday night, when I'd dropped that bottle and changed everything. Dangerous ground, maybe, unstable, and likely to shift without warning, but solid nonetheless. "What happens next?" I asked. "Next, you learn to be invisible, while remembering everything." Dominic's hand settled briefly on my shoulder, warm and grounding. "And I teach you how to survive in a world where being seen can mean dying, but being useful means living very, very well." Giancarlo's operated on a frequency different from Rossonero. Quieter, more refined, conversations conducted in murmurs that required leaning close to hear. My first week passed in careful observation, learning Beatrice's protocols while memorizing faces that appeared in Dominic's intelligence files. Men whose legitimate businesses concealed empires built on Chicago's appetite for things the law prohibited. The encrypted phone buzzed nightly with questions. Who sat at table 7? What language at table 12? Did the Colombian delegation seem nervous? I answered with details harvested from invisibility, reporting conversations overheard while refilling water glasses, alliances forming over Ossobuco and aged Barolo. Dominic met me twice that first week. Once at the warehouse, once at a coffee shop in a neighborhood where neither of us would be recognized. Each meeting involved debriefing, him extracting intelligence from my observations with the patience of someone trained to find patterns in chaos. "You're a natural," he said during our second meeting, reviewing notes I'd made about a conversation between Silva's lieutenant and someone from the Bianchi organization. "Most people hear words. You hear context, subtext, what isn't being said." "My grandmother taught me to read silences," I replied, stirring sugar into coffee that tasted burnt. "She said truth lives in the spaces between words." "Smart woman." Dominic's expression softened marginally. "How is she?" The question surprised me. "Good days and bad. The medications help, but winters are hard on her lungs." He pulled an envelope from his jacket, sliding it across the table. "First payment. 5,000 cash. Non-negotiable, non-refundable. Yours, regardless of what happens next." I stared at the envelope, my entire body going still. $5,000. More than 3 months of Rossonero wages. More than I'd ever held at once. Enough to pay rent for months and refill every prescription without choosing which medications Grandma Helena could afford to skip. "I can't," I began. "You can, and you will." His voice was firm. "You're risking your life gathering intelligence for me. That risk has value. Take the money, Nina. Buy your grandmother the medication she needs. Get your building's heat fixed. Stop choosing between survival and dignity. My hands trembled as I took the envelope, the weight of it somehow heavier than paper and cotton should be. Thank you. Don't thank me. You're earning every dollar. He finished his coffee, checking his watch with the unconscious gesture of someone whose time was measured in expensive increments. I need you at Giancarlo's Thursday night. Private party in the back room. Silva, Bianchi, the Colombian delegation. High-level negotiation about territory and profit sharing. Bianchi assigned me to that room, I confirmed, remembering Paolo's careful instruction about being deaf, blind, and mute for certain events. What are you looking for? Anything that indicates whether Silva and the Colombians are forming an alliance against me. Dominic's expression hardened. If they are, I need to know before they move. If they're not, I need to understand what's keeping them separate. And if they realize I'm reporting to you. The question I'd been avoiding finally emerged. Then you use Fernando's number and we extract you immediately. He leaned closer, voice dropping. But they won't realize, Nina. You're too good at being invisible. Trust that skill. It's kept you alive this long. It'll keep you alive through Thursday night. The private party arrived with the kind of fanfare that attracted attention while demanding privacy. Silva's people secured the perimeter, checking identification and running metal detector wands over everyone entering the back room. I submitted to the search with practiced deference. Just another server doing her job. Nothing to see. The back room at Giancarlo's could seat 20 comfortably, but tonight it hosted only 7. Silva and 2 lieutenants, Paolo Bianchi acting as neutral host, and 3 Colombians whose tailored suits and cold eyes suggested they'd built their empire through methods more efficient than legal. Just refills and appetizers, Beatrice instructed before I entered. Don't speak unless spoken to, don't linger, don't react to anything you hear. Understood? Understood. I balanced the tray of bruschetta and moved through the doorway into a room where the temperature seemed 10 degrees colder, despite the fireplace crackling in the corner. Silva's eyes tracked me as I served, recognition flickering before he dismissed me as beneath notice. The Colombians ignored me entirely, deep in conversation with Bianchi about import logistics that sounded legitimate until you understood the subtext. Cocaine routes, distribution networks, percentages and territories carved from Chicago's flesh. The North Side remains problematic, one Colombian was saying, his English textbook perfect. Santos controls access to the financial district, which limits our ability to clean capital efficiently. Santos is a relic, Silva replied, contempt evident. His father's generation, clinging to old alliances and outdated methods. Chicago's changing. The market demands innovation, flexibility, partnerships that transcend traditional boundaries. I refilled water glasses with steady hands, my face blank while my mind recorded every word, every gesture, the particular way Silva's lieutenant glanced at the Colombians when discussing innovation. And you propose? Bianchi's tone was carefully neutral, the host facilitating without endorsing. A coalition. Silva leaned forward, animated now. Your family's neutrality and infrastructure, our distribution networks, the Colombian supply chain. Together, we control Chicago from the south side to the suburbs. Santos becomes irrelevant, squeezed between our united front and his shrinking territory. Ambitious, the lead Colombian observed. Also dangerous. Santos has survived challenges before. His organization is smaller than ours, yes, but disciplined. Loyal. Eliminating him would require significant resources. Then we don't eliminate him. Silva smiled. We simply make his position untenable, cut his access to legitimate businesses he uses for laundering, pressure his political connections, force him to either join our coalition on our terms or retreat into irrelevance. I moved to the sideboard, arranging dessert plates while parsing the implications. This wasn't just about territory. It was a sophisticated campaign to isolate Dominic, to strangle his operation through economic and political pressure rather than violence. Cleaner, more sustainable, and far more dangerous than a simple hit. The Bianchi family appreciates the proposal, Paolo said carefully, but we'll need time to consider implications and logistics. Our neutrality has value. Abandoning it would require compelling justification. Consider this justification. Silva gestured to one of his lieutenants, who produced a folder thick with documents. Profit projections for the next 5 years under the current system versus a united coalition. The numbers speak clearly about which future is more prosperous. I served dessert, panna cotta with berry compote, while the men reviewed documents I couldn't see. The conversation shifted to logistics, percentages, timelines for implementation. By the time they finished their meal 3 hours later, the coalition framework had been established pending Bianchi's final approval. "Thank you for your hospitality," Silva said to Paolo as the group prepared to leave. His eyes found me briefly. "And compliments to your staff. Very discreet, very professional." "We pride ourselves on discretion," Paolo replied smoothly. I cleared plates after they departed, my hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. Beatrice appeared to help, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" she asked quietly. That was intense even by Giancarlo's standards. "I'm fine." I loaded the cart with practiced efficiency, just another night serving rich men's egos. She laughed, tension breaking. "You're learning fast. Come on, let's finish cleanup so we can both go home." Fernando waited in his SUV when I exited at midnight, and this time he drove directly to the warehouse where Dominic paced before those tall windows, tension evident in every line of his body. "Tell me everything," he said before I'd fully entered. Every word, every gesture, anything that stood out. I recited the evening verbatim, my memory for conversation proving as reliable as he'd hoped. Dominic listened without interrupting, his expression growing progressively darker as I described Silva's coalition proposal and the Colombians' receptive response. "Economic isolation," he said when I finished. "Smarter than I gave Silva credit for. He's learned that killing me makes martyrs and brings attention. But strangling my operation slowly, forcing me to either submit or abandon territory, that's strategic thinking." "What will you do?" I asked. "Adapt, counter, survive?" He turned to face me. "This is good intelligence, Nina. Exactly what I needed to understand the shape of the threat. You did exceptionally well tonight. They're going to squeeze you until you either join them or disappear." The reality was brutal. "Can you fight a coalition that size?" "I've survived worse odds," but doubt flickered in his eyes, quickly suppressed. "The question isn't whether I can fight. It's whether I can do it without pulling you and Helena into the crossfire." "I'm already in the crossfire." I moved closer, surprised by my own boldness. "The moment I dropped that bottle, the moment I took your protection, I stepped into this war. Don't pretend I'm separate from it now." Something shifted in his expression, respect mixed with concern, mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. "You're different from what I expected. Most people I bring into this world either break immediately or become monsters trying to survive it. You're neither. Maybe I'm just good at hiding the breaking." The admission emerged before I could stop it. Maybe. He reached out, his hand settling briefly on my shoulder. "Or maybe you're stronger than you know. Either way, you're valuable to me. Not just for the intelligence, but for the reminder that normal people exist beyond this world of violence and calculation." The moment stretched between us, weighted with things neither of us was willing to name. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the intimacy with the harsh reality of business requiring attention. "Fernando will take you home," Dominic said, stepping back. "And Nina? Be careful at Giancarlo's. Silva's smart enough to have people watching for exactly what you're doing. One mistake, one observation that's too detailed or too convenient, and he'll know you're reporting to me. I'll be careful." I headed toward the door, then paused. "Thank you. For the money, for the protection, for treating me like I matter beyond what I can provide. You do matter." The words were soft but certain. "More than you know." I left before he could see how those words affected me, before the careful walls I'd built between professional obligation and personal feeling could crack further. Fernando drove in silence, giving me space to process everything I'd heard and seen and felt. Grandma Helena was asleep when I arrived home, her breathing easier than it had been in weeks. The new medications I'd purchased with Dominic's money were working, giving her relief I hadn't been able to afford before. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her sleep, and wondered what price I'd ultimately pay for that relief. The encrypted phone buzzed once. Dominic's message simple and direct. Well done. Rest tomorrow. We move forward Monday. I typed back acknowledgement and collapsed onto my narrow bed, exhaustion dragging me toward sleep. But before unconsciousness claimed me, one thought crystallized with uncomfortable clarity. Somewhere between spying on Silva's coalition and accepting Dominic's money, between learning to be invisible while being useful and watching him look at me like I was more than an asset, I'd stopped pretending this was temporary. I was in his world now, not visiting, not observing from the outside, but fully immersed in the violence and calculation and impossible choices that govern Chicago's shadows. And the most terrifying realization was that part of me, the part that had been invisible and struggling and slowly breaking under the weight of survival, didn't want to leave. The call came at 3 a.m, Fernando's voice urgent despite its control. Get dressed. We're coming for you and Helena. Now. I was upright before fully conscious, adrenaline flooding my system. What happened? Silva's people hit one of our safe houses an hour ago. They're escalating, moving faster than projected. Boss says you're too exposed at your apartment. 5 minutes, Nina. Have Helena ready. The line went dead. I woke Grandma Helena as gently as possible, her confusion evident as I helped her dress with shaking hands. Nina menina, what's happening? Her voice was thick with sleep and fear. We have to go, Vovo. Please, just trust me. I'll explain everything, but we have to go now. I threw clothes into a bag. Hers, mine, medications, identification. The envelope of cash Dominic had given me still mostly intact. Fernando's SUV pulled up exactly 5 minutes later, followed by a second vehicle carrying 2 more of Dominic's men. They moved with military efficiency, sweeping our apartment for threats before escorting us downstairs. Where are we going? I asked, as Fernando navigated through pre-dawn streets. Somewhere Silva's people won't find you. He glanced at Grandma Helena in the rearview mirror, her face pale with fear and confusion. I'm sorry for the scare, Senora Carmo, but Mr. Santos takes protection seriously. You'll be safe where we're taking you. The destination was a house in Oak Park, suburbs far enough from Chicago's heart to feel separate but close enough for quick response. 2 stories, modest by wealthy standards but palatial compared to our Taylor Street apartment, surrounded by a fence that concealed security cameras and armed guards. Dominic met us at the door, still wearing yesterday's clothes, exhaustion evident in the tightness around his eyes. I'm sorry, he said immediately, addressing both of us. This wasn't the plan, but circumstances changed quickly. What circumstances? I demanded, helping Grandma Helena to a sofa that probably cost more than our yearly rent. Silva's people tortured information out of someone in my organization. They know you're reporting to me from Giancarlo's. They know about Helena, about your apartment, about Fernando's routine pickups. Dominic's voice was flat with suppressed fury. By morning, they'd have hit your building. I couldn't risk leaving you there. Grandma Helena's eyes moved between us, understanding dawning despite her confusion. Nina, what have you done? What I had to do to survive. I knelt beside her chair, taking her twisted hands in mine. I'm sorry, Vovo. I'm so sorry. But I couldn't watch you die because we couldn't afford your medications. I couldn't keep choosing between rent and food, between keeping you alive and keeping us housed. So you made a deal with the devil. Her voice broke. Oh, minha menina. What price will we pay for this mercy? The price, Dominic interjected quietly, is that Nina works for me, and I ensure both of you live comfortably and safely. That's the only price, Senora Carmo. I don't harm women. I don't coerce loyalty, and I don't punish people for circumstances beyond their control. You're the man she saved that night at Rossonero. It wasn't a question. Grandma Helena studied him with eyes that had seen too much of human nature to be deceived by surface presentations. The one whose death she prevented by breaking that bottle. Yes. Dominic met her gaze steadily. She saved my life. Now I'm returning the favor by saving hers. And when your war with Silva ends, when Nina is no longer useful to you, what happens to us then? The question carried decades of hard-earned wisdom about powerful men and their promises. Then I ensure you're both provided for permanently. Property in your names, trusts that fund your care, options that extend beyond my protection. Dominic's voice was certain. I'm not a good man, Señora Carmo, but I'm a man of my word. Nina risked everything for me. I won't abandon her when the risk becomes inconvenient. Silence filled the room, weighted with decisions made and consequences still unfolding. Finally, Grandma Helena nodded once, exhaustion winning over further protest. I need to rest, she said. This old body wasn't meant for midnight evacuations. I helped her to one of the upstairs bedrooms, staying until her breathing deepened into sleep. When I returned downstairs, Dominic stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, showing dawn beginning to break over Oak Park's wealthy streets. I'm sorry, he said without turning. This wasn't how I wanted things to progress. But Silva's moving faster than anticipated. The coalition is forming quicker than projected. He's forcing my hand before I'm ready to counter. What does that mean for us? I crossed to stand beside him, both of us reflected ghost-like in the glass. It means things get worse before they get better. It means you can't go back to Giancarlo's. Silva knows you're compromised. It means Helena stays here under guard while we figure out how to neutralize the threat. He turned to face me. And it means I need you to do something far more dangerous than serving tables and eavesdropping. What? I need you to help me turn Silva's people against him. The server you worked with at Rossonero, Beatrice. She's Silva's niece. He placed her there years ago to monitor restaurant operations, to keep eyes on who meets where and when. Dominic's voice was steady despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. She likes you, trusts you. I need you to turn that trust into leverage. The suggestion made my stomach turn. You want me to betray someone who's been kind to me. I want you to survive, and survival sometimes requires betraying people who don't deserve it. His hand settled on my shoulder. Beatrice is a pawn, Nina. Silva's using her the same way I've been using you. Gathering intelligence, building networks, creating leverage. The difference is, she doesn't know she has choices. You can show her those choices. And if she refuses? If she stays loyal to Silva? Then we lose that avenue and try something else. Dominic's grip tightened slightly. But I don't think she will refuse. I think she's tired of being her uncle's spy. Tired of living between worlds. Tired of pretending she's just a waitress when she's actually a soldier in a war she never chose. And the parallel wasn't lost on me. You're describing me. I'm describing both of you. He released my shoulder, stepping back. The question is whether you're willing to offer her the same choice I offered you. Protection in exchange for information. Safety in exchange for loyalty. A way forward that isn't just survival, but actual life. I thought about Beatrice, her kindness during training, the way she'd covered for servers who made mistakes, her gentle questions about Helena's health. She'd been genuinely kind in a world where kindness was rare, strategic, or both. I'll talk to her, I said finally, but I won't force her. And if she chooses to stay with Silva, you leave her alone. Those are my terms. Agreed. Dominic nodded once. Fernando will arrange a meeting, neutral territory, somewhere she'll feel safe. The rest is up to you. The meeting happened 3 days later at a small Portuguese bakery in Little Italy, far enough from both Silva's and Dominic's territories to feel neutral. Beatrice arrived cautious, her eyes scanning the space before she sat across from me at a corner table. You disappeared from Giancarlo's, she said without preamble. No notice, no explanation. Paulo was furious. What happened? Silva found out I was reporting to Dominic Santos. I kept my voice low despite the bakery's relative emptiness. He was going to kill me and my grandmother to send a message. Dominic got us out first. Beatrice's face drained of color. You were spying for Santos? Nina, do you have any idea how dangerous... She stopped, understanding dawning. You knew. About me working for my uncle. That's why you're here. Dominic knows too. I leaned forward. He knows Silva placed you at Rossonero, that you're gathering intelligence the same way I was gathering it for Santos. But he's offering you a choice, Beatrice. The same choice he offered me. Protection in exchange for information, safety in exchange for switching sides. Switch sides against my own uncle. Her voice was barely audible. Nina, you don't understand what you're asking. Silva is family. He's raised me since my parents died. I owe him everything. And he's used you for everything. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. You're not just his niece, Beatrice. You're his asset, his spy, his tool. When was the last time he treated you like family instead of an employee? When did he last care about what you wanted beyond how it served his purposes? Tears welled in her eyes. It's not that simple. It never is. I squeezed her hand. But sometimes staying loyal to people who don't deserve it is worse than betraying them. Sometimes survival means choosing ourselves over family obligation. Sometimes the only way forward is through doors we never wanted to open. She studied me for a long moment, searching for answers I couldn't provide. Finally, she pulled her hand away, wiping tears with the back of her wrist. If I help Santos, Silva will kill me. He doesn't forgive betrayal, especially not from family. If you help Santos, you'll have Santos protection. The same protection that got me and Helena out of our apartment before Silva's people arrived to kill us. I kept my voice gentle but firm. Dominic keeps his promises, Beatrice. He's not a good man, but he's a man of his word. Work with him, and you'll never have to be afraid of your uncle again. The silence stretched between us, weighted with impossible choices and futures neither of us could predict. Outside, Chicago moved through its daily rhythms, oblivious to the small decisions that would reshape power structures invisible to normal eyes. What would I have to do? Beatrice asked finally. Report on Silva's movements, his plans, which players he's meeting with. The same intelligence gathering you've been doing, just redirected. I paused. And when the time comes, testify against him. Help build a case that puts him away permanently. You're asking me to destroy my uncle. I'm asking you to free yourself. The truth emerged before I could soften it. Silva's empire is crumbling, Beatrice. Santos is building a coalition of his own, turning Silva's people against him, cutting off his resources. This war ends with Silva either dead or in prison. The only question is whether you survive that ending. She was silent for another long moment. Then she pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages before showing me the screen. Silva's texts, cold, demanding, treating her like property rather than family. Evidence of exactly what I described. Manipulation disguised as love. When do I start? She asked. The information Beatrice provided over the next 2 weeks was invaluable. Names, locations, timelines for Silva's operations. Dominic used it to systematically dismantle the coalition before it could fully form, applying pressure to the Colombians that made partnership with Silva untenable, offering Paolo Bianchi better terms than Silva ever could. I watched from Oak Park as Dominic's counteroffensive unfolded with surgical precision. Each move calculated, each strike targeted, violence applied economically and strategically, rather than emotionally. This was what he'd meant about survival in his world. Not the physical act of staying alive, but the intellectual chess game of anticipating threats and neutralizing them before they materialized. Silva's losing ground, Dominic told me 3 weeks after Beatrice had switched sides. His Colombian partnership collapsed, Bianchi's staying neutral, but leaning toward working with me. Half his lieutenants are questioning his leadership. Another month and he'll be too weak to pose a threat. And then what? I asked. Then we finish it. His voice was cold. Not with violence, with law enforcement. We give the FBI everything they need to build a RICO case. Silva goes to prison for the rest of his life. His organization gets dismantled, and Chicago's north side becomes Santos territory officially. Using the legal system to destroy someone. That's new for you. I'm adapting. He smiled slightly. You and Helena. You reminded me that not everything requires bloodshed. Sometimes the cleanest solution is letting civilization's machinery do what it was designed for, removing predators from circulation. The night Silva was arrested, I stood beside Dominic watching news coverage from Oak Park's living room. FBI agents swarming Silva's home, evidence boxes being loaded into vans. Silva himself, handcuffed and defiant as cameras flashed. It's over, Dominic said quietly. Is it? I turned to face him. Silva's gone, but there are always more people waiting to fill power vacuums. More threats, more wars, more impossible choices. True. He moved closer. But those future threats are problems for future versions of us. Tonight, we celebrate the fact that you and Helena are finally genuinely safe. That Silva can't hurt you anymore. That the debt you incurred by saving my life has been repaid in full. Has it? The question emerged before I could stop it. Because I think we both know this stopped being just about debt somewhere along the way. Dominic's hand came up to cup my face, his touch gentle despite the strength I knew resided in those fingers. What do you want it to be, Nina? I don't know. The honest answer felt vulnerable. I just know that going back to being a waitress who's invisible and struggling feels impossible now. You've shown me a different way to exist, seen, valued, necessary, even if that existence comes with danger. Then don't go back. His voice was soft but certain. Stay. Work with me legitimately. I'm expanding into legal enterprises, hospitality training for people from difficult backgrounds, teaching them the skills you have, the observation and intelligence that can turn invisible people into valuable assets. You want me to train spies? I smiled despite myself. I want you to train survivors. He corrected. People like you who need alternatives to the choices poverty usually offers. People who can use their invisibility as strength rather than weakness. The proposal was insane and perfect, and exactly what I'd been hoping for without knowing how to ask. And Helena lives here, in comfort, with medical care that extends her life as long as possible. I meant what I told her, Nina. I take care of my people, always. 5 years later, I stood in a converted warehouse that had become Chicago's premier hospitality training center, watching our first graduating class receive certificates that would open doors previously closed to people from their backgrounds. 50 students, former servers, janitors, invisible people who'd learned to use observation as currency, ready to enter a world that had always overlooked them. Grandma Helena sat in the front row, her arthritis manageable now with treatments we could easily afford, her eyes bright with pride as she watched me deliver the commencement speech. Beatrice stood beside me, now the program's assistant director, her loyalty to this new family absolute. And Dominic, his hand warm in mine as I spoke about second chances and the power of being seen, looked at me with an expression that had evolved from professional respect into something neither of us had been looking for, but both had found. 5 years ago, I told the graduates, I was invisible, a waitress serving people who never saw me, struggling to survive, believing that being overlooked was the only way to stay safe. Then I made a choice that changed everything. I chose to be seen, to act, to interfere in something that wasn't my business, because I couldn't watch someone die when I had power to prevent it. The room was silent, 50 pairs of eyes watching me with recognition born from shared experience. That choice cost me my invisibility, I continued. But it gave me something far more valuable, a future that extended beyond survival. You've all made similar choices by being here, by learning to use your observation skills as strength, rather than accepting them as limitations. You're not invisible anymore. You're trained, valuable, necessary. Don't waste that. Applause filled the warehouse, and I stepped back into Dominic's embrace, feeling his pride and love wrap around me like protection I'd finally learned to accept. After the ceremony, as we drove back to Oak Park where Helena waited with dinner prepared by staff who treated her like beloved grandmother rather than employer's family, Dominic pulled a small box from his jacket. I've been carrying this for 6 months, he said, opening it to reveal a simple band set with diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. Waiting for the right moment. I think today, watching you transform 50 lives the way you transformed mine, qualifies. The proposal was quintessentially Dominic, practical, certain, assuming my acceptance because he'd already decided our future. But this time, his assumption was correct. Yes, I said, taking the ring and sliding it onto my finger where it fit perfectly, because he'd measured my hand months ago in the same way he measured everything. Carefully, precisely, with attention to details others missed. On one condition. Name it. Grandma Helena gives you the rings at the wedding, and we get married here, at the training center, with every graduate we've taught as witnesses. Because this isn't just about us, Dominic. It's about proving that people like us, invisible people, struggling people, people who society overlooks, can build something beautiful when given the chance. His smile was radiant. Deal. We married 6 months later in the warehouse transformed for celebration, surrounded by 100 former students whose lives intersected with ours through choices made and chances taken. Grandma Helena, at 83, walked slowly down the aisle with the rings, her twisted hands steady with purpose as she blessed our union in Portuguese prayers, older than the city we'd conquered. And when Dominic kissed me before witnesses who understood exactly how unlikely this love was, how many impossible choices had led to this moment, I finally understood what Grandma Helena had meant years ago about debts and mercy. Some debts were worth incurring. Some mercy came with prices worth paying. And sometimes the greatest gift was simply being seen, truly, completely, dangerously seen, by someone who looked at your invisibility and recognized power waiting to be claimed.